She said, I will pay whatever is necessary. This was my dad's watch. He wore this every day for 30 years. And so when she got it back, again, she was crying. And it's, to me, that's a really special thing about these particular types of objects, is that you can associate them so closely with the person.
Right. Hey guys, I'm Max from WatchCrunch, and today we have a very special guest. They call him the Bob Ross of watch repair.
Hello there, and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall.
How are you, Marshall?
I'm good, Max. Thanks for having me on. I've heard that before, and I really like that. Actually,
you like that?
I do. It's it made me laugh at first, but I take it as a compliment now.
Do you have a wig?
No, I'm not wearing it, at least.
We need to get you one. That would be, that would just finish out the look.
Maybe an April Fool's,
So I've been a distant admirer of your channel for a long time. And so tell us sort of the genesis of Wristwatch Revival.
Yeah, I used to work on cars a lot with my dad. He was a mechanic. My career kind of took me more towards creating stuff on computers. And at some point, you just want to get your hands on something. And one of the things I always liked about working on cars was restoring them, right? Taking them from unusable or a state of disarray to something that you could be proud of to drive or to show off.
Much bigger project than a watch.
Well, I mean, physically. Mm-hmm. And I had started collecting watches, and I thought, I wonder if I could repair these in a similar way to the way that me and my dad did the cars. And so I found a YouTube channel from a guy named Mark Lovick. It was the Watch Repair channel. And I mean, this guy's like my hero, right? Like, he put out a ton of videos. He and other watch repairers will tell you when you first start that you should take photographs as you go. Because as you take things apart, you're going to forget, especially when you're new, where things go, what they're called, and how they go back together.
It's not easy because your hands are in the way. Like, you're dealing with such a small thing.
Totally.
There's not a lot of angles where you can get in.
And that was a challenge. I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I try to keep my hands to the side. But and I did. I mean, directly overhead is the clearest shot,
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
First, how many times harder it is for you at this point to record and do the watchmaking versus if you just got rid of all the equipment and just focus on the watch?
It's really funny. I worked on a watch recently without recording, and I was like, this is so easy. Like, you can get super close. I don't have to.
Well, because your mind has to be both like the producer and the watchmaker.
Right. Right. I'm constantly adjusting cameras, constantly move the shot. What do I want to do with this? Also, just the logistics of, like what you said, like having your hand, your head, right? I have an overhead shot.
Yeah, right.
If you use a loop, you have to get about this close to the workpiece, right? So that means your head's
with your Bob Ross wig.
And really with the wig and the wig, exactly.
Yeah. The other question is, what are you wearing? That's a nice looking vintage watch.
I have today. It's a nice day here in Seattle, so I actually have it on like a rubber strap. But this is a 5513, so it's a Rolex Submariner.
Beautiful.
This is a meters first version.
Okay,
so
tell us what that means.
It's just a stupid Rolex style thing. They put the water resistance on it, and normally for the American market, it would say the feet, and then it would say equals how many meters, and this one has meters first. So it either means it was earlier or for European market.
It's a beautiful example.
Thank you.
I'm wearing a I think late 50s, early 60s Universal Genève pull router.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this is
that is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great watch, and it has a lot of little details that are really pretty. And then when I opened the case back and saw the little micro rotor,
right? Yeah, that's an OG.
It is gorgeous.
Right there. Yeah, those are cool. You get props for me for that one.
Thank you. Nice. Yeah, I was trying to find the one that would make you
the nice vintage piece. I love it.
Okay, so you brought us some watches you've worked on. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so I brought a few. These have actually all been on the channel, and this one, in fact, this is an Omega Seamaster 30. And I've worked on a couple of these because I like these as like a sweet spot for a vintage watch. They're simple, but they're classy looking. They were considered sport watches for their day, but they would be much more towards the dress end of thing now. Or maybe you'd say like an everyday watch, something you could wear. And, this was the one that started it all. Actually, this is the very first video I ever did. This one's a really great example of an eBay find and a really cool one for the channel too. This is an Abercrombie and Fitch Super Shipmate. And I found this on eBay and I thought, Abercrombie and Fitch? I'm like, the place at the mall? Like, what are we talking about here? Right. And it wasn't working.
The ones with the half naked dudes out front, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. And I was like, I don't get it. And so this is a perfect example of part of what a lot of watch people are really into, which is kind of the history, the stuff behind it. You know, why does this company exist? What do they stand for? You know, and I looked it up and it turns out Abercrombie and Fitch, you know, was a huge supplier of outdoor goods.
Okay.
They were
almost like LL Bean. I love the hands on that. It's so
the hands on this are cool.
The lugs
also
are really pretty.
Yeah, I can show you a little tough to see, but if you look below the 12 and just above the 7, you'll see some discoloration. And that's because that's where the hands were when it stopped. And the reason that there's color under that is because those are radium hands. Now,
oh my God,
we're talking about a tiny little dot.
So that's a radiation injury to the dial.
Yes, that is exactly what that is. There is no lume anywhere other than on those two hands. So that's the only part that got affected by it.
And tell us about the Rolex.
So the Rolex, this is the first one I ever worked on. And I did a video on this watch as well. And, you know, I got it off of eBay and it was non-working. And it was kind of a miracle. It was sort of the eBay dream. A couple of screws had backed out and lodged themselves in the balance. And that's why it wouldn't run. And the person just didn't know. They had picked it up from somebody or whatever and just wanted to move it on. So I got it for a great price because it wasn't working. And I opened it up and within 5 seconds, I'm like, wait a minute. There's a screw missing and it's right here. And I pull it out and boom, the balance wheel just kicks up and it ran okay. It did need a service still. It wasn't running like perfect or anything. But I mean, that doesn't happen very often, but it's pretty rare. Most people that are going to sell an expensive watch will have somebody at least open it up and just take a look.
Right. Well, it sort of speaks to like the engineering of these movements, right? You have the confidence that kind of regardless, unless it's without a movement, like you can probably fix it.
Yes, especially for a more common movement like this one, where even though, you know, they're more expensive, the parts, you will find them. Right. Like you can go on eBay, there's people that have Rolex parts around. But working on that watch was really eye-opening for me as well, just because it was the first time that I got to work on a Rolex movement. And, you know, in the watch game, when you go deeper, right, everybody has this thing where like at first they're like, Rolex is the best watch in the whole world. And then you get into it, you're like, oh no, they're actually not. And then maybe they're overhyped and that's not really what I want to be. And then you kind of come back and go, actually, these are pretty great watches. You know, like they wear really well. They're really well made. And so I was I'd already gone through that journey, but I'd never actually worked on the movement. And I opened it up and it is utilitarian perfection. They are freaking bulletproof. I mean, every part in there has been refined and thought over. And, you know, this to me is over-engineered in the good way. You know, the way where it's
not
just
overcomplicated.
Right. It's quality and they know exactly what works and what doesn't. And they've been around for a very long time. So they've been able to refine those processes. And, you know, going back to cars, right? There's some engines that they just overbuilt and you can tune them up and all of a sudden they make 800 horsepower, even though you didn't change that much about it. And there's other ones that
RB26.
Great. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. SR20DT. Like there's all these motors that people find that you can get 1,000 horsepower out of them stock. And then there's some that like, you know, you tweak them just a little and they die, right? This is in that first category.
Gotcha. So Rolexes are just pleasures to work on.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's almost
I
like
love working on
I contrast this with, you know, I had back-to-back an Audi and a Porsche. It was a very different experience working on them. Both quote unquote over-engineered, but in different ways, right? Like you work on a Porsche and you're just like, oh, like this all just makes sense. Things are where I expect them to be.
And then, intuitive.
Right. And then you try to change the brake pad on an Audi and you realize they've stuck a sensor behind the brake pad so that it monitors the wear. But then if you put a new one in, now you have to take it to the dealership and reset the sensor.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, this is definitely in that first category where every time you get stuck, you do the thing that your brain says, well, it would make sense if this happens. And it just goes, and
Yeah.
it goes right into place.
It
And
just
you're
makes
like,
you smile.
yeah, it's also interesting because, going to what you said, you can tell that some things are engineered with the person who's going to work on them in mind.
Right.
And other times that person's an afterthought.
So I've dabbled a little bit.
Oh, have you?
I've sort of built some Seikos. I've
Uh-huh.
recently I took one of the Alpinist models, and one of the newer ones have a Cyclops.
Yeah.
And I really hate that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think unless you're a Datejust, you should really be doing that.
Yeah.
So I bought a little torch, and I watched a lot
And
of
you-
videos. And I
You unsealed
yeah,
it?
I took everything apart. I took the
Nice.
crystal off, and then I also thought, well, while I'm in there, right, and that's sort of a car guy mentality. While I'm in there,
Yeah.
might as well replace
Hey,
the water
these
pump.
pistons, yeah.
And
really
so I
is.
decided to change the date wheel from a white one to a black one to kind of suit the color scheme. And man, did I get myself into trouble. I was looking at, I think, the one side of the movement. I flipped it over to look at the other side. When I flipped it back, there was a gear on the table. And my heart just dropped. And I said,
I hope you were filming.
I don't have a video to go back
Oh,
on.
no.
And I was so frustrated. I literally had to go outside and just take a walk. And I came back to it the next morning. I was in bed watching YouTube videos until I had a relative confidence in sort of how things fit back together, and was able to get the watch back together. And my question for you is, you make it look so easy in the videos, obviously the magic of editing. But tell me about like the frustrating instances, because it can't go that perfect every time.
Oh my, yeah, it does not go perfect. I try to show when I screw stuff up in there, but like you said, I mean, sometimes it just takes me a long time to get a part in, and I'll edit so that it just goes in.
But when did something really go?
Oh, the worst thing so there's like sort of two categories. One of them is I broke something. So I did something wrong and, oh, what was that? Oh no, it's broken. That's obviously frustrating. Usually that comes from trying to take shortcuts, which for whatever reason, my brain loves to try to take shortcuts.
What are the easiest parts to break on a watch?
Usually the pivots of the wheels. So that's the thinnest part, right?
Yeah.
And if you, for example, the pivot's like an axle,
Right.
And when you put the bridges on top,
Right.
those are holding the
You have to
axle
line
on
up
both
multiple.
ends. And if they're not, and you go screw it down, it'll just snap that pivot right off.
Gotcha. And
So
that's why you're constantly sort of jiggling the wheels as you're putting the plate on
Yeah.
to make sure they're spinning freely.
Right. And I'll use like a stick to hold it steady once it's in
Right,
place.
right.
Cause like if you let go and you look over here, it might jump out a little bit, and then you just screw it down and then you hear that really
So
bad
this
noise.
is this concept of again, going back to working on cars, mechanical empathy is the way that I've heard it described.
Okay.
It's sort of like being in tune enough with the screws and the bolts that you kind of know when it's about to give.
Oh,
and,
for
and
sure.
you don't push too far.
For sure. I 100% have that sense from working on cars. On cars, for important items, you'll use a torque wrench, which will, give it to a very specific tightness.
Yeah.
But on watches, we don't use those typically.
That's always kind of boggled my mind. It's these such delicate, precise things, and you just go hand tight.
Yes. And it's a feel, right? You just know, and certain screws you can crank on pretty good, and some of them you really like, they'll shear right off if you go too hard.
And some of these do back out over time just with vibration and stuff.
It's rare. It does happen. I mean, I've bought watches that had it like that. Yeah. I was going to say the other, so breaking stuff's disaster area 1, but 2 is losing parts.
Yeah. I took a watchmaking class,
Oh, it sucks.
and I was mostly on the ground crawling.
Yeah, oh, the worst I ever had though was I dropped an entire tray of parts.
Yeah.
Like the whole, you take apart the watch and you put in one of those little dust covers. I dropped it. And it was an Omega Seamaster 120. There's a video
This
on
is
the
in
channel.
real life, not in a nightmare you had.
This actually happened.
Oh my God.
And this is at my apartment.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I just did that.
Yeah.
And I had to get down and it was next to a shelf. So some of the parts went up on the shelf. Some of them went on the ground.
Oh.
I was just like, and I had to get down there and find everything I could. And so what I did is I pulled up the video and I watched myself.
Cataloged it.
I did. I actually, it took me probably an hour and a half.
I think I would have just quit. I think
Yeah,
I would've said,
that was I might need to take a walk moment, but I don't know. It depends on how you're built, like how your makeup is too, because like I used to play poker for a living And if you are somebody who gets frustrated at things that are out of your control or sometimes even in your control, and you act on it, like you will not last in that world very long.
Right.
You really have to teach yourself to be calm and say, okay, this sucks. This isn't what I wanted to happen, but what do I do now?
You do the voiceover after you record. Right. And this has kind of been amazing to me because, but you actually emote.
I do.
With the video.
The barrel. This is one of my favorite parts. And that's why right there. I love that sound. It's a great feeling.
Yeah. So what I do is when I'm recording or when I'm doing it, I don't. Almost ever. Like, because I watch my own video. I can hear myself. You know, like the worst I'll do is I'll go, you know, like if I screw something up or I'll laugh. But I don't like express it. I kind of keep it in.
Okay.
And I'll remember what I felt. And then when I do the recording for the VO, when the edit's done, that's when it's time to let that out.
Because it comes out really genuine.
Yeah, it is.
But having done...
I'm not an actor.
Right. Having been behind the camera, I said, oh, well, now you have to... Is he acting out the emotions? But it sounds like you kind of store it.
I do. And I try to kind of just walk that line between what was I... Because I can tap into what I was feeling when I did it and then just try to kind of bring that back up again.
Right. But you do certainly have the voice for it. I can see why people tune in, and just doing my research, I realized that you have this whole other life that, you know, is ongoing but preceded watchmaking, which is Magic: The Gathering.
Yeah, I played in like junior high, and then I stopped, and then I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, I was playing poker, and I was playing seriously, and a bunch of the poker players play Magic. It exercises a similar part of your brain strategically and that kind of stuff.
And for those of you that are not familiar, Magic is a collectible card game that you can also play in like a virtual battlefield with your friends.
Yes.
And so there's like two aspects. There's
or
like,
your enemies.
Right.
As I was learning how to play, I was learning from a really close friend and kind of mentor of mine. And, you know, I told him, I said, dude, we should do a podcast. This was in 2008, so podcasts weren't really a thing yet, but they did exist, you know. And I was a little ahead of the
Joe
curve
Rogan
on them.
of Magic.
Yeah, sure. And I told him we should do it, and we did. And the podcast kind of took off, and that was the first time I'd ever done any on-air anything or recording myself or I'd never done anything like that. And then eventually I parlayed that into a spot on the coverage team for the Pro Tour, and then eventually I moved my way up to be the main commentator for that. So I've been doing that for about 10 years.
I was searching through my old Magic cards that I found in my mom's closet, and I found, I think, maybe a card I'm going to give to you that, you know, combines the two hobbies a little bit.
An Armageddon clock. Oh, that's great.
Can you tell us a little bit about that card? If it's worth $1 million, can I have it back?
It is not worth $1 million, so it's going to stay with me. If it were, I would give it back to you. Yeah, I mean, this is cool. Yeah, it's called Armageddon Clock. This card came out in 94, 95. Basically, this is a type of card that can give you a benefit in the game, but punishes you until you do.
But it does sound like video making, so I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, it has a lot of. Well, thank you, Max.
Yeah,
That's it's an Armageddon Clock. It's
right?
I'll put it up
works.
next to my workbench. That's great.
Well, thank you so much, Marshall, for
Max,
joining us.
thanks for having
It's
me.
been a pleasure. I don't think I need to tell you to check out Marshall's channel because you probably already subscribed, but it's called Wristwatch Revival. If you are into ASMR, if you're into repairs of anything, also check out the new WatchCrunch app we just launched. We're building out new features every day. We're going to have a deeper discussion on there about Marshall's watches, his content. So make sure to join us. Until next time.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks.